Hey, well, welcome to the A Little Better podcast. My name is Daniel. I'm going to be your host today, and we're diving in to trust issues part 1. That's right. We're talking all about trust. We're going to be taking a deeper dive into our Sunday morning sermon series at Northridge Church. We're located in Rochester, New York. Our lead pastor, Drew Karcher, is on the podcast with us, and we have a guest host, Brad Files, who'll be kind of a normal voice on our podcast. And so we're excited to dive in. Make sure you listen all the way to the end to get a sneak preview of what's coming this Sunday at Northridge, as well as towards the end of the podcast, we start talking all about kind of some nuances in trust. Like, what does it look like for us to trust God? What do you do if you feel like your trust in God has been damaged by leaders in the church, Christian people, or even you feel like God hasn't showed up on how you wanted him to or when you wanted him to? So we're excited to dive into episode 1 of our relaunch of the Little Better podcast, Trust Issues, part 1. Hey, well, welcome to the Little Better podcast. We're super excited to be jumping back into it with a brand new series that we kicked off this past Sunday. Drew, how you feeling?
I feel tired from Sunday.
Awesome.
Kickoff Sunday.
That's right. And if you're listening on the audio version, you just heard a new voice from our podcast. Brad, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Have no idea what I'm doing.
That's great. Well, how about we do a little introduction for everyone? Drew, everybody kind of probably knows you. This is you just finished your 5th year, or are you starting your 5th year at Northridge? What is that exactly?
I just finished my 5th year, so I'm headed towards number 6.
Headed towards number 6. Awesome. And then Brad.
Yeah, how many years? So I've been at Northridge. I first showed up at Northridge in 1967, believe it or not. I was 5 years old, and my dad worked at Kodak, and someone came through the office saying, "Does anyone's wife play the organ?" And my dad raised his hand. So our very first Sunday, 1967, we walked in the church and my mom played the organ. And I grew up there and went, a lot has happened since then, but and then years ago there was a guy named David Whiting who I had kids in the school, and he said, you really ought to come back, and I took him up on it. So since 2000, so we moved to Chicago in 1998, and in end of 2005 we came back to Northridge. So I think I had like a 25-year stretch and now a 15-year stretch.
So you've got us edged out just slightly.
We missed a few things.
Yeah. And then I'm Daniel, and I get to serve on staff at Northridge in a few different areas. And I've been here the shortest, coming up on 2 years in March. And so we're excited to dive in. Drew, let's kick off with the first question. Where did this series come from? Like, against all odds, you walked us through a brief overview that we're going to hit some key figures in the Bible, but where'd this really come from?
Yeah, I think it really came out of COVID. I often meet with our teaching team and the guys who help me research sermons. And we just talked about what are people struggling with right now? And trust was a big thing, right? Trusting God through an incredibly hard and crazy season. And so we just started, kind of wrestling, and God started, even me, like, God, I asked the question in the season with church, like, God, why are you doing this? And what are you doing through this? Right. And there's just this level of trust that many of us need, I think, to get to, no matter what God brings. And we just thought like it would be a great kickoff series to just kind of, if we could grow in our trust as a church, it would benefit us greatly. And so it's kind of the heartbeat of the church, of what God's doing in my heart. And it all kind of came together with our teaching team.
Can I ask a question about that? Just in terms of like how the sausage is made behind there. I know that you plan out a preaching calendar well in advance. You're not winging it Sunday to Sunday. Do you still do retreats? And Was this, again, you said it came from COVID, but was this one you put on the calendar, or was there someone else on the team who brought that forward?
This was one I put on the calendar. So this was
Mhm.
one that I came out of my heartbeat and what I felt like I was sensing God was calling me to lead our
Mhm.
church through. And you know, I'm a collaborative leader, so I took it to our guys and was like, "Hey, what do you think about this idea?" Because if they're like, "Yeah, this is cool, but I don't think it's the right time," because basically what we do is we plan pretty solid 6 months out, and then a year out is kind of interchangeable. So we're pretty flexible if God does something that we need to respond to. And so
So COVID changed the calendar. That preaching calendar shifted quite a bit,
Flight
huh?
response.
I feel like everything this last year changed the calendar, right? So
Indeed.
Drew, I loved your point in the message of, and your convincing point of that we all trust in something in your map analogy. And that I love that question that you talked about, like, is the thing that we're placing our trust in worthy of our trust? Because for me, I was a little bit skeptical when you were like, we all trust something. I'm like, I don't know if I do that. But then like you started walking through the Atlas, MapQuest, and then Siri, and just processing it in my own mind of like how much faith I put in, you know, hey Siri, take me to this location when I've never been there. Especially for me as a newbie to Rochester, I basically have to do that every single day if I want to figure out where I'm going.
Mhm.
And just, you know, comparing our trust in our technology to the trust that we lack in God so much of the time. And so I just found that, yeah, that very
I
challenging.
Yeah, I don't know if you're posing a question to Drew, but I would respond to that, chime in and say, yeah, that's the one that's been kicking around in my brain, quite a bit too. But I absolutely believe that everyone puts their trust in something. I come from a science and engineering background, and so many of my schoolmates, are committed atheists, and they think they don't trust in anything. And I'm like, dude, you have so many unanswered questions, right? That you fill in the gaps on. I mean, you are making big assumptions, and you're trusting that God isn't there. That's a pretty big leap. But I do believe that everyone trusts in something, just because, like you also said in the sermon, you don't need to have all the answers, and no one has all the answers.
right.
We never will get there. We'll never have all the answers. So for everyone on the planet, you don't have all the answers. Where is the trust, for the gap on what you don't have the answers on?
Yeah, and I think most people just bank on themselves, right?
Mhm.
Like at the end of the day, if we're claiming we don't trust anything, usually that trust falls on our shoulders, right? We just believe that we got it covered, we'll take care of it, we'll protect, we'll provide. And I think that's where most people who would say, this God of the universe, this creator, I don't know much about him,
Right.
but I'd rather bank on me because I know what I can do and I know what I can bring to the table.
I think the culture, that's the cultural flow is in that direction more than ever, right? I mean, I think it was Tim Keller was talking about, everyone used to get their truth from somewhere else, right? But now everyone's told, look for the truth inside yourself.
Yeah.
And now it's for everyone, we tell them growing up is your sexual identity, whatever it might be. Don't let anyone tell you who you are. You tell you who you are. And don't let anyone mess with your truth, and follow your passion. Don't let anyone get in the way of what you decide.
Yeah.
And
So
with the GPS, like I literally, if I don't know what I would do in my life without Siri guiding me, like I really don't. Like can you imagine going back to those methods? I wouldn't make it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, to me, it just seems crazy to trust in myself. I mean, other people must think more of themselves than I do, just because I'm like, dude, I have to come up with a whole morality, what's right, what's wrong, what star to steer by. I know I'm going to go off a cliff, if you leave it to me. So I am so grateful to have a good God pointing out the way.
And I think that's why we responded to COVID with this series, because it's not only like we have to learn to trust God, but I think during COVID, everybody realized it's out of their hands, right? There's only so much they can do. And so where do we turn? Well, no matter what life brings, we turn to our trust in God. That's why it's so important. I thought the timing of this series, as we navigated everybody like, oh, what am I going to do? Am I going to bank on a mask to save me? I'm going to bank on a vaccine or whatever it is, right? Really, at the end of the day, we're banking on God first and foremost because we trust him.
Yeah.
What do you, I guess the big question that you brought out that we were going to talk about today is about God's regret in that is what do you do when what it seems like God is doing doesn't make sense to us? That's a big question that I feel like I have and maybe others have. Like, what do we do in our lives as new Christians, been Christians for a long time, like when it doesn't make sense, like the whole year we just had? Like, what do we do when it doesn't make sense?
I mean, the easy answer is trust him, right? Yeah, that's ultimately what this whole series is about. Like when we first wrote this series, it was called That's a Bad Idea. And basically kind of another side angle of this series is like trusting God when his ideas seem really dumb, right? Like, so this next week, I'll give you a little sneak peek. We're talking about Joshua and the walls of Jericho, right? And God's strategy for knocking the walls down is just honestly, logically, the dumbest idea you could ever come up with, right? And it's like, you want me to do what? And that's what this series is out. Like, God, really? You want me to build a boat? I don't know. And rain? That just sounds dumb. But I still got to trust God. And that's what's hard, right? And you get a window into like, God says, I regret making, mankind. What did he mean there, right? And I actually read Piper while I was reviewing the series, and he put a great illustration that I think gives us understanding of this moment, right? Because we've probably all done things that we know we're right, but still regretted it. Okay, let me give you an example. Right? You have kids. My kids disobey me, and when they lie to my face, we discipline them with a spanking. That's how we do in our house. And there have been times where I will spank my child, and I try to hug them, love them, and they don't want it. They run away. And at some level, I feel sorry. I almost regret doing it, but I know it was right because of the outcome. And I think that gives us a window into God, right? He's not saying I made a mistake. He's feeling sorry for all the sin and the wickedness. And his regret is, I didn't do anything wrong, but I'm seeing what's happening and I'm going to fix it. And yet still God provides what? A rescue plan. It's just the story of the Bible, right? Like sin, God intervenes and saves humanity. And so if you read other translations, some translations don't say regret. They say God was sorry too. So it's, read it in context, read other translations.
Well, yeah. And Ezekiel says it. Ezekiel also says God takes no delight, in judgment. I mean, it's just like he's going to do it, but he doesn't want to. I don't know. That is a tough one to tease out. Get very nuanced with that. Oh,
yeah, because there's a lot of nuances in the sense of like the comparison of our human regret of Drew, like your regret in your example about your kids and spanking, like you knew that was the right decision, but obviously the outcome of like your kids like running away from you, like you didn't foresee that probably coming. And the difference in like human regret and God's regret in itself is he still sees all time, and he just sees the scope. And so there's a deeper complexity to God and his emotions than in our human complexity, because, well, how can God have sorrow if he already knew it's going to happen in the midst of it? And inside of that, most scholars would take you to your next place to like 1 Samuel 15. And that's the next place Piper actually takes, I think in some commentaries in verse 29, where he says, God does not lie, does not change his mind. He is not a human being. you know, and so in there, that same word is used in the original language, that regret in verse 11, where he says, I regret I made Saul king. And so there must be a deeper level to God's feelings and emotions towards regret, even though he knows what's happening. He's engaged in the world. He's making decisions. He's moving pieces around in that sense. But he's still, the response of humans isn't what he desired it to be, because he's given us that own ability to make decisions as well.
Yeah, Piper says the moment you compare your emotions to God's, you're going in the wrong direction, basically.
Yeah.
God's emotions are so complex and so perfect, and ours are so marred with the flesh and sin. And so to think your regret is the same as God's regret, you're missing the bullseye.
Yeah, and words will just always come up short in describing that, right? There's just not enough words to tease it all out for us. It's beyond putting into words, but everything in the Bible is true. Yeah, but it doesn't mean we fully understand.
Well, it goes back to trust, right? You don't have all the answers. Sometimes there's things in the Bible, right? I'm reading through the book of Revelations in my quiet time. And like, hey, there are things in the Bible that are designed. You'll even read in scriptures, Jesus says something and people didn't get it because he didn't want them to get it, right? He didn't want them to fully understand it. Right. And we're talking about God here, right? And so you will never have all the answers until you are with him, right? And so we have to be okay trusting him even when we don't understand everything about him.
Yeah. I guess my mind goes to, I wonder if the same language would use about Jesus or God the Father putting Jesus on the cross, you know, I mean, that certainly not, it was necessary, absolutely necessary. And the outcome is glorious and joyful. But I mean, I'm sure that same language of regret, you know, could be applied there. And Jesus in the garden having it seems like all kinds of indecision, right? He's praying for the cup to be taken away from him, and then praying that he has the strength to do God's will. So a lot of humanness comes through, but then we get deceived into thinking, oh yeah, he's just like a human. No, he's not just like a human.
Right. Yeah, the question that comes in my mind, just like as we're talking about this, and even just thinking about Sunday's message and Noah's response of him being a righteous man and doing all the things that God asked him to do, and that was all kind of rooted in his trust. The question that comes up in my mind, Drew, and I don't want to steal too much of the series thunder, is like, okay, so what does trust look like for me if I'm trying to like live out my life as a follower of Jesus, and it doesn't make sense to me what God's doing. Maybe if my own situation doesn't make sense. So what does trust look like, or where do I start? Like, where do I start in this journey of like learning to trust God more?
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys remember my intro to my sermon, right? Before I actually started my sermon, we prayed together, right? And I said, put yourself in this posture, right, of open hands, right? And so to me, I think trust, just the starting place is that open-handedness, right? It's a surrender of the things that you know you shouldn't keep, and it's the receiving of things that you should keep. And so trust to me is knowing who God is, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about this week, is having an accurate theology of who God is, getting to know God. And like any relationship, the more you get to know your future spouse, the more you date, the more I'm in a marriage, the more I know my wife, you know, the as I get to know them, the deeper my trust grows, right? So it's always 100%, but the more you know God, it just opens your heart to more trust. Still 100%, but it's just you're knowing more of what he wants for your life. And so it's living open-handedly, right? Letting go of the things that don't belong and asking God for the things that do. It's complete obedience to what he if you don't like it, it's a hard place.
Right. Well, yeah, I was thinking obedience the whole time, of course, when you were saying that, but and when Daniel says, what does it look like? It's going to look different, of course, for everyone. There's going to be different challenges. For a lot of people, it's, and it probably comes up most often when the world's counsel is counter to God's counsel, right? Where everyone says it makes total sense to divorce. It makes total sense to, maybe there's a choice, and I'm not saying the right or wrong here, but, a choice to declare bankruptcy, and you say, no, I'm going to, muscle through. And even though it costs me, meet these obligations. Or, but I can certainly think about, relationships where you're just faithfully obedient, and hang in there. I mean, yeah. Does everyone's marriage, we've been married a long time. Does everyone's marriage have times that are better than other times? It's just, there's sometimes, where, the feelings might be there and you hang in there, and then thank God the feelings come back. But if you'd left, you never would have seen that.
Yeah.
That's good.
At the end of the day, you could basically say trust is obedience, right? Yeah. It's when God says something, you never say no, right? And that's like, if we're honest, that's ridiculously hard, right? Because that's every area of your life. That's your finances, that's your sexuality, that's the way you go about marriage, business, leadership, the way you do your taxes, the way you live your life, the way you take care of your body.
Yeah, we come up short, but we know what God's, what his counsel is. But yes, it's trust produces obedience, right? It's not like we obey God to win points or, get up there. But that trust, how do I know if I'm really trusting? Well, look at all that obedience.
Yeah. I loved your point, Drew, also on Sunday. And you said it even in this conversation of like, trust is 100%, or like obedience is 100%. What would you say to somebody who's like, wow, man, I'm not 100%. Like, I'm not there. Like, they would honestly just self-admittedly say, like, I'm not 100% all in. Maybe they're skeptical. Maybe they would even claim not to be a follower of Jesus. Like, but they're interested. They're intrigued. They want to take, steps in that direction and explore God, faith, Christianity. What advice, even Brad jumped into this, of where would you say for that person? It says, like, I'm not 100%. So what do I do with this?
One, I would say that's okay, right? Like, hey, everybody's journey is different. And what I would say to somebody is ask all your questions, right? Explore on a journey of getting to know God. And this is what I believe. If you truly go on this journey to find God, God will find you, and you will, I believe, transfer your trust to him. Because when you get to know God, you realize how good and awesome he is. And the response to that is just, man, I want to know him and trust him.
Yeah. And just spending time with God's people, is awesome, but also just, and spending time in God's word. It's just, I love introducing people who don't even know what they believe to, like, the Gospel of John, and just say, hey, just read it and tell me what you think, or walk through it with them. But just the more you expose yourself to that, I just think that creates those opportunities. As far as that trust goes, and that 100%, we all got to that place of 100% when we stepped up to the altar, with our wives, but that was because we were in love with them, right? And this was something we stepped into, not because people told us it was a good match or it made sense or cheaper. Two can live cheaper than one. It was no. We're 100% because we fell in love with that woman. And I do believe if you spend time with Jesus, you'll fall in love with him.
That's right. Yep.
That's good. The longer when just talking about trust, I love your comments on that. The longer I've been around church world, the more and more you hear stories about people who've had their trust broken, that it's been fractured by people that do things in Jesus' name, or even some would say that God himself has fractured their trust because they didn't like his response to certain situations. What would we say to those people who who are still around and still are interested, but they feel like their trust or their faith has been fractured either by Christian leaders, Christian people, or just God himself. What would we say to those people?
I would say two things. One, you can't put your trust in people because they're always going to fail you. I don't care if they're a pastor, a leader, whoever it is. Like, you put your trust in people, you're always going to be let down, right? Yeah. But I get the struggle. Some people feel like, oh, I put my trust in God and I feel like he let me down. And I feel like the one area that we have to grow in is usually our trust with God comes with expectations of God. And usually we feel like our trust is broken because we put expectations on God and he didn't come through on our timetable in the way we want it. And when you trust God, it's without expectations, right? It's God. Think about Noah, right? Like, okay, you want me to build a boat? I'll do that, God. I'm sure Noah wasn't thinking 55 to 75 years, right? And I feel like a lot of people in our society, after 30 years, okay, God, you broke my trust. You said you're going to bring rain and you didn't, right? And so trust without expectations, I think, is what we're after.
Yeah, I love that. And that's what I was thinking, even with your opening examples, because you talked about, like the evil Patriots being down 25 points or whatever, but not everyone who's down 25 points wins the Super Bowl. Okay. I mean, it's like the outcomes aren't always what we expect or want, but there is that trust that whatever the outcome is, it will be what God uses for good. And it is still within his plan.
Yeah. So. And even as you were talking about that, as I reflect even like on my own journey in life, most of the time, like, God, in air quotes here, I'm giving air quotes, doesn't come through with something I'm praying for because I'm not ready. Like, if I'm just being honest, like, I'm not ready for him to do that thing. Like, how inconvenient would it have been though for Noah if it would have started raining like 20 years in and he's not done with the boat yet? Like, it's like God promised rain, and then here comes the rain. He's like, wait. I'm not ready. Like, I need to finish this boat first. Like, and so, when we say God's timing is always perfect, like, we say that tongue in cheek, but like, that's the reality. Is like, he knows when we're actually ready for that thing that we so desire, whether that may be a new job, a good marriage, or kids, whatever that thing is. Like, God knows the real us, not just the personified, like what we try to present, because he really knows if we're ready or not.
And before that end game arrives, right now in the present, in that horrible situation, God decide, this is God's best plan to change us. It's I remember in a seminary classmate whose child, newborn infant, was this, horrible situation, weeks, life-threatening situation. I believe that the child pulled through, but I remember him saying to me, Brad, I wouldn't trade this for anything. I've just been, I am helpless. I am totally helpless here. And I have never been closer to God. I've never felt his presence more. So there can be opportunities in great suffering for God to change us.
I love that statement too. God's timing is always perfect until it inconveniences me. Like, come on. We say that all the time, but it's like, God's timing until I have to wait longer than I wanted to, or until he doesn't come through when I want him to. And like that, it just shows our lack of trust in God. And really, this is not like, what I love about this series is this is not just for a segment of our church. This is for everybody. Because I know in my life, there are areas, right, where I gotta trust God and seasons. So
absolutely. Yeah. Well, guys, we've had a great conversation up to this point. Drew, do you have anything you want to tease us out for Sunday? You've already given us a small taste of what we're talking about. Anything else behind the curtain that you want to share?
We're going to dig We're going to dig a little bit deeper in trust. It's going to be fun. We're going to look at another story. And a low key thing that I love about this series is you got to pay attention to get it, but we're going to take you from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And we're going to kind of give you a glimpse of how the Bible flows from Old Testament person after person after person of trust all the way to Jesus. And so I like that. The series where you get a little bit of a biblical literacy of, like, if you're not sure how the Old Testament flows in the New Testament, you'll get a little glimpse of that from each character that we roll with.
Yeah, but
Absolutely.
you want to hear every sermon to get that benefit, right, Drew?
Come on, Brad. Come on, Brad. Let's go.
All of them. All
Brad,
of them.
you heard it from him.
Hey, and one family just plug right there. Accidentally, our kids ministry and adults are talking about Joshua and Jericho this Sunday.
Nice.
So if you got kids in Kids Men, that have good family conversation about trust, faith, and the Bible. So
yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you this Sunday, and we can't wait to see you and chat with you again next week on A Little Better.